Hello everybody, let us continue with part 4. Geeb Lies Gang. Farewell, Lady Rosemine. Judith alighted from my panda bus that she was going to be sitting out the strip. Angelica climbed in to take her place, at which point the nobles surrounding me produced their high beast and took flight in order. Angelica, did you get some rest? I asked, as I took to the sky as well. She had gotten several days off since she had already accompanied me for spring prayer and was now joining in us on our journey to Lies Gang. Yes, she replied. I rested when Master wasn't training me. I'm going to assume that means she didn't rest much at all. Yeah, most likely. Master trained me even more than usual after I mentioned you praising me for cutting up that fish, Lady Rosemine. Angelica continued. He told me to show you even greater precision during the next dissection. I think he wants to participate too. In that case, inform him I shall invite him to the temple at the next opportunity. I understood, Angelica replied, sounding delighted. I'm sure that will make him very pleased. That's up to Ferdinand. She then started to tell me how amazing Bonifacius was, when the strongest knight in the Knights Order, who the strongest knights in the Knights Order were, and what fighting styles both Eckert and Ferdinand preferred to use. I gave a few perfunctory responses until Cornelius brought his high beast a little closer. Lady Rosemine, he said, we have arrived in Lies Gang and will soon be landing at the summer mansion. I squinted down at the scenery below us. There was nothing but blackish earth with patches of snow here and there, making for a very pitiful sight, lacking much in the way of greenery. I was sure there had been a greater abundance of plants and shrubbery during Lampert's wedding. The land certainly does change with the seasons, I commented. It hasn't even occurred to me that we had entered Lies Gang. This makes it easier to identify enemies attempting to hide, Cornelius replied. Lies Gang had already been the setting for many failed ambushes in the past, but I wasn't worried about another attempt. The Knights Order was accompanying my guard knights, and during spring prayer, everyone was busy preparing the fields to help increase the harvest. That reminds me. The first time I came here, Sylvester was disguised as the Blue Priest. The high beast at the lead started to descend, signaling that we had arrived. We had visited Lies Gang many times before, but the only thing I remembered clearly was the side building used for temple visitors. We had gone inside the summer mansion when we attended Lampert's wedding, but we had departed right after lunch. The entire affair had also left me so tired I went straight to sleep, so it hadn't stuck in my memory. I exited my high beast, whereupon Fran, Monica, and Hugo started unloading luggage and food and carrying it to the side building for priests. Our ceremonial work here would involve nothing more than handing the small chalices to Geeb Lies Gang, which would take no time at all. But we had to stay until the printing talks ended. Thankfully, Lies Gang had a side building we could use, which meant that Fran and the others would never cross paths with the province's nobles. It was a lot more comforting than in Hollandsdale, where the winter mansion was like an iron fortress. Lady Rosemine, the chalices are to be handed over after the greetings, correct? Fran asked. Indeed, do prepare them. After receiving the chalices, I waited with Fran and Monica for Geeb Lies Gang to arrive. Our plan was to take the Gutenbergs to their lodgings in the city once our immediate business here was done. For now, they were waiting inside Leslie. Welcome to Lies Gang. Geeb Lies Gang started exchanging lengthy greetings with Elvira, the representative of the printing industry. He was a scholarly-looking man who seemed a bit older than Cardstad, and while his eyes had been burning with the flames of ambition during our first encounter, I did not sense any such fire now. I determined that it was best to keep my guard up purely as an extra precaution. Once the greetings were complete, I stepped forward with the chalices. By the grace of Flutrain, the goddess of water, the bringer of healing and change, and the 12 goddesses who serve by her side, Gudul, the goddess of earth, has been granted the power to birth new life. I pray from the bottom of my heart that the countless lives upon this mortal realm are filled with Flutrain's divine color. Indeed, Geeb Lies Gang replied. Gudul, the goddess of earth, is filled with Flutrain, the goddess of water's mana. Blessed be the melting of the snow. Blessed be the coming of spring. The chalices were delivered, and my work as the High Bishop was thereby complete. I took a step back and instructed Fran and Monica to prepare the side building while Hugo cooked for us. Audley will be getting my guest room ready in the meantime. As for Brunhilde, I instructed her to stay with me. She would surely benefit from seeing more of a province rather than Groschel. Is that why you went out of your way to bring me despite my being underage? Brunhilde asked. There are many reasons, I replied. Did I not explain them? Audley would have struggled if she were my only attendant here, but bringing Riarda along simply wasn't an option. She had served both Gabriel, who had brought about Lies Gang's decline, and Veronica, so her presence wouldn't have been welcomed. Laisletta was also an option, but it was much easier to bring Brunhilde, who was an archnoble and part of the family. Brunhilde shook her head. You did not mention that you would make me observe Lies Gang's lower city. Oh, did I not? How absent-minded of me. Oh, ho, ho, ho. I turned my back to Brunhilde and walked over to Gieb Leisgang. Now then, although we have not been here for long, may I ask to be guided to the Gutenberg's lodgings? Certainly. Gieb Leisgang waved a hand, signaling one of his scholars to step forward. It was the head of the printing industry. He must have already heard about things in Haldensel and Groschel, as he led the way without saying anything in particular about me bringing the Gutenbergs of my high beast. The Gutenbergs will be staying in Fluss, only a short distance away from the summer mansion, our guide said. The mansion was located on a modest hill surrounded by forest land, and Fluss was the commoner city closer to it than any other settlement. Once everyone was in my panda bus, or atop their high beast, we flew over the walls surrounding the summer mansion and made our way down from the hill. Fluss felt very similar to Haas. The commoners were primarily farmers, and the way that all those doing other jobs were concentrated around the winter mansion was very familiar. Several of the nobles grimaced about being in a commoner city. Wilfred and Charlotte looked more excited than anything. They were used to visiting these kinds of places for spring prayer and the harvest festival, and were commenting about how Fluss resembled the farming towns of the central district. The smithy and carpentry workshops are here as well, our guide continued. We ask that you inform the city's people of your arrival. I understood. We greeted the foreman of the smithy and carpentry workshops, then left us some luggage with them. It was the same process as in Groschel, and the Gutenbergs had gotten used to it. Brunhilde, who had been watching the Gutenbergs work, suddenly looked around in wide-eyed realization. There is no stench here, as there is in Groschel, nor do I see any filth. Is there a reason for this? Because this province has a bustling farming industry, I replied. Groschel was firmly surrounded by walls, as was Ehrenfest, for that matter. But Leisgang had them only around its summer mansion. This resulted in sprawling farmland within arm's reach of the city proper. The focus on farming also meant that the population density was low, which stopped any smells from being concentrated in one location. Lenore, as a Leisgang noble, have you ever visited a commoner city? Brunhilde asked. Indeed, Lenore replied with a nod. As an apprentice knight, I at times left the summer mansion to hunt babies on farmland and in forest. This was before I entered Lady Rosemine's service, though, so it was only for a period of a few years. Brunhilde was related to the Leisgangs, and she had visited the province several times before, but she had never ventured outside the grounds of the summer mansion. She muttered to herself, surprised that commoner cities would differ so much, presumably because she hadn't looked at or even thought about them before now. I see that other provinces truly are unlike Groschel, Brunhilde said. It was a comparison that she could make only because she had seen Fluss in person. I proposed that she continue visiting and learning from other places, using this knowledge to improve her home province, and she replied with a confident, I shall. Incidentally, where is the printing workshop? I asked. Next to the winter mansion, Wilfrid replied, having already visited the city when performing his final checks. I hear that printing in Leisgang is going to be done as winter handiwork. Leisgang had many acres of farmland, and because it was in the south, its snow melted quicker than that of somewhere like Haldensdale. It was such a rich farming environment that it was called Ehrenfest's breadbasket, and the printing industry would purely be a side business rather than its primary focus. Legib said that the farming industry would remain the province's highest priority, Wilfrid continued, a natural choice for Ehrenfest's breadbasket. Leisgang's harvest would pretty much decide what the nobles had to eat during the winter, so the province was taking special care every year to avoid any complaints about a smaller yield than usual. I see you've been working hard, Wilfrid, I said. Huh? I am simply impressed by how much you know about Leisgang. I did a lot of research with Ignace before we left, Wilfrid declared with a subtle but proud smile. Elvira let out a quiet, oh my, at this remark, while Cornelius followed with an amused, I guess Rosemine's her next target. Oh no. The Gutenbergs will be staying here during their trip, our guide announced. We had finally arrived at the winter mansion after stopping at Fluss's various workshops to drop off most of our luggage. The farmers were due to return to their land, so this accommodation was ideal. I see it was wise for us to bring our own cleaning implements, Gil said. Shall we begin right away? Of course, let's go, Gil. They were very much used to these long trips, and after climbing out of my panda bus, they got right to work. It was at their instruction that the Gutenbergs started unloading the remaining luggage. And as I saw how reliable they had become, I couldn't help but smile. Hugo is going to be preparing our food for the duration of our stay here, I said, as Les and Gil continued to oversee the cleaning. Meals should be taken in the side building. I returned to the summer mansion, bringing only Benno and Damien of the planting company with me since they were needed for the next stage of the agreements. We sipped tea there while Gieb, Leisgang, and Elvira led the discussion on the final checks, after which the planting company signed a contract regarding the printing and plant paper guilds. Leisgang had a thriving logging industry thanks to its forests and mountains, and the wood it produced was going to play a key role in the making of paper. The children of the orphanage would also be helping out, making it seem like this work could also be done by women and older people. Gang, I apologize for my rudeness, but if the printing industry is being treated as with your handiwork, is there not a chance that your income won't exceed your investment? Reynolds asked, seeming a bit concerned about how the contract was shaping up. As it stood, the printing industry would only be active for a short while, and unlike in Haldensdale, not all the citizens would be working toward it. I was similarly concerned that Gang would not draw much profit, especially because they had put so much money into the endeavor. That is not for you to worry about, merchant, Gang said. Income is not the only thing that will make this investment worthwhile. We have no intention of canceling our contract, no matter how this fares financially. Okay. I'm guessing your connection to Rosemine is what you're hoping for. Understood, Benno replied with a nod. He then turned to Damien, who produced the necessary contract, and the required signatures were soon put to paper. That was the final contract we, the planting company, needed to sign regarding the printing and plant paper guilds, Benno said. I see. In that case, they may return to the other Gutenbergs, Gang said. Benno and Damien stood up, said their farewells, and then departed. Coming here must have been a real test of mental endurance, especially with all the nobles around. At least now they could rest in the side building. Now that the meeting was composed entirely of nobles, Gang called for fresh tea to be poured, then looked over at Wilfred and Charlotte. He kept up his peaceful smile, but his eyes seemed to be searching. I tensed up at once, eager to protect them. This is a rare opportunity, Gang began. I wish to hear your thoughts directly from you, rather than through a messenger. Would you indulge me? Wait, he's talking to me? I instinctively straightened my back, while blinking in surprise. Naturally, in this environment, I couldn't refuse him. The air was heavy with tension, or suspense, affecting not just my retainers, but everyone else in attendance as well. Uncle? Lenore tried to interject, but the Geeb simply shook his head. I glanced over at Avara and Karstedt, who returned almost imperceptible nods. They were instructing me to deal with this properly. So I need to prop up Wilfred and emphasize that I don't intend to become the next Archduke. I turned to face the Geeb, recalling the advice that Ferdinand had given me, and said, You may ask what you like. Thank you. Now, I am of the opinion that Abigail will always reach out to Geduld when she is within his grasp. How do you feel about this, Lady Rosemine? Excuse me? Hold on a second, let me decide this message. Or decode this message. It certainly is the case that Abigail will always reach out to Geduld, I said, repeating his words almost verbatim in an attempt to buy myself more time to think. Geduld is often used to refer to where one lives, so that probably means Ehrenfest in this case. After some quick contemplation, I managed to guess at what he was trying to say. Why do you not want to aim to be the next Ob when you are an Archduke candidate with more than enough skill, mana, supporters, and accomplishments to make it happen? Well, he's not wrong! Of course, I couldn't be certain that this was his question, but I was more confident that it was something along those lines. But I am not Abigail, I continued, so I do not have a need for Geduld. I was hoping to make it clear that not everyone wanted the Archducal seat. The Geebs exhaled slowly. My niece Lenore, my distant relative Brunhild, and my half-nephew Hartmut all said the same. But I am simply not satisfied. Why do you not seek Geduld? If you did, Lady Rosemond, then everything would come together so smoothly. So he said, but having a former commoner like me become the Ob was bound to cause more problems than anything else, especially if someone figured it out. Lord Wolfrid was clearly on the path to becoming the next Archduke, but when he entered the Ivory Tower, he lost his standing and was placed on equal footing with his younger siblings, the Geeb continued. Now, he is once again seen as being the next Archduke, but only because he is engaged to you, Lady Rosemond. You are the one best suited to become the next Ob, and this knowledge is eternally frustrating to us Lyesgangs as your family by blood. Geeb Lyesgang maintained that there wouldn't be any problems if my engagement were reversed, such that I took the position of Ob instead. I tilted my head slightly and glanced over at Wilfrid. He was doing his best to keep his head up, but his tightly clenched fist told me everything. I firmly believe that Wilfrid will make the better Ob, so our positions will never be reversed, I said. Geeb Lyesgang and Wilfrid himself stared at me in astonishment, while the nearby retainers all did the same. Karstedt, meanwhile, looked to be very interested indeed. It is precisely because he was once knocked down that he knows what it takes to claw back up again, I continued. He is going on to the widely loathed temple and assisting with ceremonies to loosen my burden as the High Bishop. He sees Ehrenfest people with his own eyes, and possesses the feelings necessary to both protect and live with them. Geeb Haldensdale acknowledges this as well. But the same goes for you, Lady Rosemine, does it not? Guy Blisgang asked, stroking his chin. You displayed the talent necessary to overcome your poor reputation as one raised in the temple. Dedicate yourself to Ehrenfest as the High Bishop and protect the duchy's people. In your compassion, you opened your heart even to orphans. Well, when you put it like that, I really do sound like a saint. Yeah, but yeah. I can only listen in a daze, struggling to believe that he was referring to me. Hartman must have been spreading his legends about me to that tune. In truth, I didn't even want to think about it. Guy Blisgang, there's one thing in particular that separates me from Wilfrid, I eventually said. To me, this one thing makes it abundantly clear that he is better suited to becoming the next Ob. And what is that exactly, the Gebe asked, leaning forward a bit. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I merely rested a hand on my chest and smiled. My very life is dedicated to books and their creation, making new paper as cheaply as possible, setting up more and more printing workshops. Everything I do is for the sake of this solitary aim. Yes, my efforts are proving beneficial to the duchy right now, but I can assure you that I act only out of personal interest. I, unlike Wilfrid, am driven only by my own selfish desires. I wish to create, read, and surround myself with books. I see, Guy Blisgang replied. He allowed only the slightest amount of surprise to show on his face, but it was enough for me to guess what he was thinking. News of my book obsession had probably reached his ears at some time ago, but only now did he realize its severity. The tension in the air seemed to ease, allowing Wilfrid to crack a smile. How would Ehrenfest fare under Rosemine, who always prioritizes her own wishes above all else, he asked. Not well, I would say, and ensuring that it does not come to pass is the challenge given to me as the next Archduke. There is still much for me to learn, but I intend to put my all into it, Guy Blisgang. You are Rosemine's most fervent supporter, which means you are able to help Rosemine realize some ideas and convince her to give up on others. I request that you use this to guide Ehrenfest down a brighter path. It would be very heartening to have her blood relatives on my side. Wilfrid, didn't you more or less just say that I would make a tyrant archduchess and that the Blisgangs can only vouch for me to become the next Ob if they learn to control my rampages? Yeah, that's kind of what he said. I wasn't sure how much of that little speech was genuine and how much was deliberately exaggerated, but it seemed that Guy Blisgang hadn't known about my rampaging tendencies. Wilfrid had succeeded in landing a critical hit on his spirit. I understand both of your positions, the Guy said. However, in either case, Blisgang is a fair distance from the city of Ehrenfest. The degree to which we can help is limited, but we will do what we can if allowed. Despite having made it clear that he was my strongest backer only a moment ago, Guy Blisgang was now taking a liberal step back and clarifying there was only so much he could do. It's just, I will need to sway grandfather's unbreaking will first. The Gebe looked in the direction of what was presumably my great-grandfather's room. He was effectively made to eat dirt when Lady Gabrielle married into the duchy, and he continued to suffer under Lady Veronica's cold treatment. He has lived surrounded by hatred, and his heart has been hardened by it. I understand how he feels, so as I have experienced our province's darker days with him, but... Guy Blisgang turned back to us, sighed, and then looked over all the gathered retainers with a half-smile. There are now more Blisgangs among the archducal family's retainers, but this was not the case 5 years ago. Ehrenfest winters are long and leave the north of the duchy frozen over, meaning the harvest of a southern province like ours is essential. We have used our mana to expand our farmland for generations since long before Ehrenfest became the duchy it is today. And we have continued to protect our vast fields throughout the changing of the Obs through loyalty and marriages. We will remain loyal to the Ob to protect our province, as we have done, and shall always continue to do. In truth, my intention had been to express my loyalty to even Lady Veronica after grandfather died. Wilfrid stared at the Gebe in disbelief. But I was told that the Blisgangs hated grandmother. Very few people would feel otherwise about someone who treated them so poorly. However, she is still a member of the archducal family. Proclaiming our loyalty to protect our land is part of the Blisgang creed, and it remains in our best interest to continue it, even if our expressions do not come from the heart. Unlike his grandfather, who had stood among Ehrenfest's top brass before being knocked down and mistreated when an archduke candidate from Arensbach married into the duchy, Guy Blisgang had been mistreated from birth. He was fine with facing reality, displaying loyalty, and working on climbing his way back up the ranks. His plan had been to secure bonds through marriage, perhaps having Sylvester take a Blisgang woman as his second wife, or marrying a Blisgang woman to whoever would be the next archduke. And then everything changed, the Gebe continued. Lady Veronica fell from power before grandfather died, and as if by fate, Lady Rosemine was baptized as Lord Karstad's daughter and promptly adopted by the Archduke. It was when I gave everyone a blessing during my baptism and the Ob adopted me that Grandpa Lasgang started getting all excited about Glory returning to his house. My adoption meant that it was within my rights to become the next Ob, and with the controversy surrounding Wilfrid at the time, most nobles had assumed that Sylvester would give the position to me and make Wilfrid my husband in order to tie his blood to man. The castle had gone through changes of such great substance that even Geebs from faraway provinces had come to notice. These included a massive series of replacements for the scholars working in the castle, similar replacements for Wolfies and Chainers, the Winterer playroom being completely reworked, and Lord Ferdinand and I overseeing the sale of new toys and books. If you become the next Ob, Lady Rosemine, then it will mark the birth of a ruling Liesgang Archduchess with none of Gabriel's Arensbach blood. No sooner had grandfather made the call than the Liesgang nobles previously scorned by Lady Veronica gathered and moved to back you. However, the Charlotte kidnapping incident had occurred soon after, and for the next 2 years, I was asleep in a Jarif. There was no way for the Liesgangs to regain their former status without a figurehead to support. Great-grandfather had apparently screamed, "Are there no gods?" before falling unconscious, and quite some time had passed before he woke up again. Wow! Yes, there are gods, it's just bad luck. Even while you were asleep, Ehrenfest continued to change, the Geeb said. The former Veronica faction was replaced. Liesgang nobles were assigned to increasingly important posts, and the mood in the air indicated that Wilfrid and Charlotte would be competing for the Ob seat. The Liesgangs had united to make me the next Archduchess, but as there was no indication of when I might wake up again, there was no helping them drifting apart. But no sooner had we lost hope than your awakening was publicized and you arrived for winter socializing. Upon hearing this news, great-grandfather had shouted, "The gods have returned! I will make Lady Rosemine the next Ob," only to then break into a coughing fit and end up bedridden. Still, none were against helping a blood relative become the next Ob, and Geeb Liesgang once again got to work organizing the Liesgangs over winter socializing. Incidentally, grandfather's wish amounted to nothing when you and Lord Wilfrid were engaged, the Geeb continued, and with the Liesgang due to become the wife of the next Archduke, it felt as though history was simply about to repeat itself. Well, there's a difference, though. The one in question, there's a difference because the Archduke is not going to end up like Geeb Liesgang, so yeah. Ehrenfest was climbing higher up the duchy rankings each year, and now duchies that had previously never looked our way were giving us their attention. Great-grandfather had thus assumed that another Archduke candidate from a greater duchy would once again come into the picture and force me from my position as the future first wife. That I would end up suffering in spite of everything I did to improve and bring wealth to Ehrenfest. His own prediction outraged him, and the hatred that he felt for Lady Gabriel and the type of the time was instead directed at Wilfrid and Sylvester. In order to avoid a repeat of such a great tragedy, great-grandfather was set on ensuring that I become the next Ob no matter what. Some say that people grow more stubborn as they age, but on top of that he was mostly bedridden, stuck in his own personal echo chamber, blind to the change of the outside world. To me, he seemed that he was getting too carried away, but many of the older Liesgangs apparently still empathize with him. Grandfather's fall from grace is the reason that his hatred for Arensbach runs so deep, Geeb Liesgang explained. Can you and Lord Wilfrid cleanse this dark feelings inside him? Wilfrid was on the receiving end of a very challenging look from the Geeb, but he merely shrugged without looking too bothered. The most I can do is meet and speak with him. I don't know about cleansing any dark feelings. I can assure you, though, I have no intention of allowing such a tragic history to repeat itself. Thank you. That's nice and all, but cleanse his hatred? All of a sudden he sounds like an evil spirit or something. In the end, we scheduled a date for us to meet with great-grandfather. It was agreed that we should see him before we were due to become busy with spring prayer work. And with that, Geeb Liesgang turned to his attendants. Speaking of spring prayer, I said, does Liesgang hold the same kind of ceremony as Haldensale? I was aware that many Geebs wanted to recreate the Haldensale miracle in their own provinces. Geeb Liesgang shook his head. Liesgang has lost its stage, so we cannot do it as Haldensale does. Does this mean that Liesgang is one of the provinces that destroyed theirs? I asked, frowning a little as I recalled the various problems that had arisen after I opened the Bible to look for instructions on how to make the stage. No, the Geeb replied with a wry smile. We did not destroy ours. We truly lost it at some point amid our long history. Liesgang had frequently changed its base of operations while establishing and growing its farmland. They had no records of their distant past, nor did they know where they had originally been situated, so they couldn't even confirm whether or not the stage was destroyed. Are you okay with that? I asked. The speed at which the snow melts can mean life or death to northern provinces such as Haldensdale. That is why the northern Geebs despair over their stages being destroyed. Liesgang is in the south, however, and the snow has very little impact on our harvest. Okay, so they're fine with it. Okay. It seemed that the magic circle for summoning spring wasn't very relevant down here. At most, having the snow melt earlier than usual was a pleasant bonus that would increase their harvest a little. Your chalices will more than suffice, Lady Rosemine, Liesgang concluded. This year, we will once again be able to fulfill our duties as Ehrenfest's bread basket. Okay, visiting great-grandfather. Oh, boy. Here we go. He's going to be friggin' stubborn about this. I can already tell. Lady Rosemine, Brunhilde said, it is time to visit great-grandfather. Brunhilde, Lenore, Hartmut, Cornelius, I muttered, addressing my arch-noble retainers one by one. We all share the same great-grandfather, I see. It feels strange to actually say it. All nobles are connected by blood in some way or another, Cornelius said with a shrug. Great-grandfather certainly likes to moan about Lady Veronica's family, but Lord Wilfrid and Lady Charlotte have archducal blood. In other words, though, it may not be particularly thick, they have Liesgang blood as well. Lenore gave a small giggle, but to great-grandfather, the thickness of the blood matters more than anything. That is why he so fervently wishes for you to become the next Ob, Lady Rosemine. As my retainers, are you not dissatisfied that I don't strive for the archducal seat? I asked. Their responses came in the form of a collective shrug, and their eyes all seemed to say that it was simply the safest option. I believe it would be best for you to do as you like, Lady Rosemine, Brunhilde said with a reinvigorating warmth. As your attendant, I will strive to support you such that the trends you bring riches to Ehrenfest. Attempting to change your course would surely prove fruitless anyway. She's right, Hartmut agreed with a nod. No matter what you do, Lady Rosemine, I shall strive to ensure that all see you for the saint you are. You may rest easy knowing that I will allow no mistakes on your part to sully your good name. He delivered this promise with a dashing smile, but for some mysterious reason it made me feel exceedingly uneasy. Our conversation continued as I traveled down the hall in Leslie, and soon enough we saw Wilfrid and Charlotte waiting up ahead. Wilfrid, Charlotte, my apologies for the wait, I said. Given your pensive expressions, I assume you two must be contemplating something. I thought that earning the Liesgang's aid was going to be a serious challenge, since grandmother raised me and her blood runs through my veins. But Geeb Liesgang made it sound as though the most I need to do is convince your great-grandfather, Wilfrid explained. We were just talking about that. Charlotte rested a troubled hand on her cheek. Yes, but I cannot imagine for the life of me what series of words or actions would calm the former Geeb Liesgang's wrath. Do you have any ideas, sister? Not at all, I said, then gesture for us to continue toward great-grandfather's room. I can only do what I did with Geeb Liesgang, expressing my thoughts and intentions in person rather than through a messenger. No matter how much great-grandfather wished for me to become the next Ob, it wasn't something I intended to do. In fact, as a former commoner, it wasn't even possible for me. The most I could do was ask him to give up on his dreams. Great-grandfather's feelings of rage and animosity are his own to deal with, I continued. It was never my aim to do anything about them. I will simply be informing him that I do not wish to become the next Ob, and that's all. I am impressed that you can be so nonchalant about these things. If you, the Liesgang's beacon of hope, make such a bold declaration to his face, I'm worried he might just travel to the distant heights. Oh no! That would be bad! I'm worried that actually might happen. I'm worried that if she says it, that might actually break his heart enough that it would kill him. Oh, I don't want that. That'd be very traumatic. I thought back to the traumatizing sight of great-grandfather collapsing right in front of me. That would be problematic indeed. I certainly won't be revealing that I'd rather be a second wife for the sake of more free time, assuming that this lower position wouldn't stop me from getting involved in the printing industry and creating my own library. Not even I knew that, Wilfrid barked. It's the truth, though. Sister, Charlotte interjected, the Liesgangs would never accept that, which is why we usually never mentioned it. It does rear its head from time to time, though. Both of my siblings let out heavy sighs. Just watch what you say here, Wilfrid warned. We don't want him ascending to the distant heights partway through our meeting. Indeed. We arrived at the side building where great-grandfather was staying and were escorted inside. I expected to see him lying in bed, but he was properly dressed and seated in a chair in the largest ornate room. The fact that he looked more energetic than last year might not have been my imagination. Lady Rosemine, welcome to Liesgang. It must be by the grace of the gods that we are once again given the opportunity to meet. Great-grandfather rejoiced with almost comical exaggeration in my arrival, but he didn't even acknowledge Wilfred and Charlotte. His attendant lightly tapped him on the shoulder, but he swallowed the hand away with annoyance. I am with my siblings as well, I said. They are Wilfred and Charlotte. Can you see them, great-grandfather? He blinked rapidly and squinted, as if only just noticing them. When one reaches my age, their eyes truly begin to fail them, and you are sparkling so brightly that everything around you is that much harder to see, Lady Rosemine. My apologies. I don't know if he's being sincere, or if he's actually just saying that to avoid acknowledging that he saw them and ignored them. Great-grandfather went on to greet both Wilfred and Charlotte, but he never actually looked at them. It was impossible to say whether he really couldn't see them or was deliberately averting his gaze. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We were offered seats, then tea and sweets were brought in. Great-grandfather wasn't able to test for poison himself, it seemed, so his attendant took on the duty in his stead. Once it was proven that our refreshments were safe to consume, the tea party began. Great-grandfather lavished my recipe with praise and said in high spirits that thanks to Hugo tutoring his chefs during Lampert's wedding ceremony, his meals have improved dramatically. He was especially fond of pound cake as it was soft and easy to eat. One can even taste the season by having pound cake mixed with a little fruit juice, Charlotte noted. Taste the season? That certainly is an idea, great-grandfather said. He closed his eyes and started to tell us about the seasonal fruits and vegetables farmed in Liesgang. Gib Liesgang Emeritus, there is something I must say as well, Wilfred announced when the mood turned peaceful. But great-grandfather didn't respond at all. His eyes were still closed and he was perfectly still, so it was hard to tell whether he was pretending not to hear him or had actually fallen asleep. He was a tough foe indeed. Just getting him to listen was a struggle. Great-grandfather! Great-grandfather, I called. Oh, yes, Rosemine, he asked, appearing to jerk awake before unsteadily turning to face me. Can you hear me, I asked. Indeed, I can hear your exceptionally adorable voice. So he was just pretending not to hear Wilfred then. No helping that. I'll just have to be the one to talk. I cannot become the next Ob, nor do I wish to, I said, going straight for the most important point. Great-grandfather sat still for a moment, then he slowly raised a hand and cupped it behind his ear. My apologies. To think my ears are in such a state that I would miss even your precious voice, Lady Rosemine. I am profoundly ashamed. Great-grandfather, I cannot become the next Ob, I repeated, nor do I wish to become the next Ob. I don't know what to say on this one. Oliver raising great-grandfather let out a bizarre cry. He then collapsed onto the table where he remained completely motionless. Did he just up and die? What? I swear. Charlotte cried. This is what I told you. Now choose your words carefully, Wilfred snapped. You were too blunt. Definitely on this one. You should have been a bit more subtle. Or use some kind of noble euphemism. I don't even know what kind of noble euphemism you would have used. I guess the one that Gabe Liesgang had asked before. I don't know. As we all floundered over great-grandfather's abrupt collapse, his retainer stepped forward. Please calm down, he said. This is nothing out of the ordinary. He became a little too excited, but he will soon regain consciousness. You may enjoy your tea until then. So you say, but... It was hard to relax in a situation like this. I glanced around nervously and saw that Wilfred was surprisingly calm. This is usual, huh? He remarked. Still pretty bad for the heart. Wilfred, how can you be so at ease? I exclaimed. We've seen you do it so many times. He raised an eyebrow at me and said, because I'm used to you collapsing out of nowhere all the time. I mean, look, your retainers are even calmer. What? It was true. Brunhilde and Ottilie were already refreshing our tea while great-grandfather's attendants prepared to carry him to bed so that they could start attending to him. When you pass out at tea parties, I always have to do what these attendants are doing now, consoling the guests, cleaning up after your mess. Wilfred explained, how do you feel, Charlotte? This is your first time seeing someone collapse in front of you like this, right? I am fine. I will need to get used to this sooner or later, Charlotte replied, her voice quavering. Her face was pale as she watched great-grandfather being taken away. You do not need to get used to this, Lady Charlotte, Brunhilde said. We attendants have many countermeasures in place to prevent Lady Rosemine from collapsing. She poured me another cup of tea, which I sipped at while watching great-grandfather's retainers try to wake him. Now, wake up. You are in the middle of a tea party with Lady Rosemine. Oh, good. Good. He's not dead. Good. I worried for a second that he had died. Or had a heart attack or something. Jesus. It was some time before great-grandfather regained consciousness, but when he did, he was instantly raring to go. His recovery was unusually quick based on my own experiences, and as I started to suspect that he had used the secret technique, ultimate move, play dead. Great-grandfather coughed a few times. My sincerest apologies. Guy Blasgang Emeritus Wilfred said, there's not much more I need to say. And so we ended up in a peculiar cycle. I would speak to great-grandfather, then he would collapse almost immediately after. This apparent farce continued nearly 5 times. His retainers made no attempt to intervene, so our conversation advanced slowly but surely. My sincerest apologies. Great-grandfather, I see you've awoken again, I said. Now, where were we? You just mentioned that the king acknowledged your engagement, Hartman answered in an instant. I praised my excellent retainer, then moved to continue. Great-grandfather, do you truly intend to oppose the king's decision, I asked. Surely you would never do such a thing. No, of course not, he replied. That said, I am simply worried about your future, Lady Rosamund. You do not need to worry, Guy Blasgang Emeritus, Wilfrid said. I promise to end the Blasgang struggles with Rosamund as my first wife. For the very first time since we had arrived, great-grandfather looked straight at Wilfrid. It seemed that he had last decided to face him instead of continuing this unnecessary and outright clownish act. The atmosphere grew cold as the hatred within him overflowed into the room, unable to be contained. Uh-oh. Oh dear. His wrinkled smile disappeared as though he had just disposed of a mask, leaving only emotionless features. Despite this vacant expression, because of this vacant expression, the hatred that had consumed him after a lifetime of suffering and humiliation became infinitely apparent. Wilfrid audibly swallowed. His hand resting on the table was trembling uncontrollably. I reached out to touch it. He recoiled at first, then looked at me and nodded. As I am engaged to Rosamund, I intend to do well with the Blasgangs moving forward, he said. There is no falsehood to that. Then what will you do if an Archduke candidate from a greater duchy weds into Ehrenfest? Great-grandfather asked in a scratchy voice. If one day I end up in the same position as the first Guy Groschel, I will have father adopt my children before she comes to secure their status as Archduke candidates. The greater duchy will not be pleased about that. Father has already agreed to it. He will not commit the same mistake as the Ob of the past. Oh, so that's what they planned on doing. Okay, I never heard of that. Freaking not mentioning things here. So the Ob has resolved too, then, great-grandfather said quietly. His eyes had glazed over, and he seemed to be staring at Wilfrid, but perhaps he was recounting some event from the past. I waited for him to respond again, but it was his attendant who spoke next. I believe that will do for today. We were being urged to leave, so we obliged and quietly excused ourselves. I glanced back at great-grandfather one last time on my way out. He was still staring into space, his eyes unmoving, but for the slightest moment I was sure that he was weeping. I think he got through to him, at least a little bit. Okay. Let's continue. Sitting at the Archduke Conference. Spring prayer was over, and our full attention was already devoted to planning for the Archduke Conference. We held a discussion at the Italian restaurant with Ehrenfest's major store owners, including Benno and the Guildmaster, where we went over our findings from last year, what we had improved since, how many merchants could feasibly be taken in, and so on. We also settled some printing and publishing related details with the planting company, including the bottom lines we needed to meet. Elvira was due to attend the Archduke Conference as a scholar of the printing industry, so we would deliver all this information to her, whereupon she would rewrite it in from a noble's perspective. After finishing our meeting with the lower city residents, we returned to the castle and talked things over with Sylvester. These are terms that Ehrenfest must not compromise on when forming our agreement with Dunkelfelder, and these are terms that Hartman says we can be more flexible with, I explained. If we can establish this as our precedent, future negotiations with other duchies will become that much easier. We had already ironed out the finer details with the planting company, including how we would manage translations, royalties, and the lending, printing, and selling of any books. I would use my modern knowledge as a basis and adjust it bit by bit to suit Jürgen Smith's ways. Furthermore, I continued, the Merchants Guild advised against forming any new trade agreements. Ehrenfest simply does not have the capacity to accept more merchants from other duchies. Last year we had accepted 8 companies from Klassenburg and 8 from the Sovereignty. We had put up our guests in high-class inns and intended to do the same this year, but 20 companies would apparently be our limit. So they say, but we need to increase trade if we're going to negotiate a printing deal with Dunkelfelder, Sylvester noted. He then scrunched up his face and added, it's one thing to turn down others, but turning down Dunkelfelder won't be easy. I said the same thing to the lower city merchants, I replied with a big nod. We tried thinking of some good workarounds, at which point Benno of the planting company suggested that we distribute new confirmation paper. This way we could give Dunkelfelder some of the spaces we originally would have given to Klassenburg. Wait, so we'd accept fewer merchants from Klassenburg? What's the big idea? I explained Benno's thoughts. As per my previous report, a Klassenburg merchant left his daughter in Ehrenfest upon finishing his business here. She continues to be safe thanks to the hospitality of the planting company. But in Ehrenfest, hosting someone who cannot carry out their own winter preparations is by no means a simple matter. Starvation was a very serious risk in cases when the blizzard continued for longer than expected, which was why households needed to prepare a season's worth of provisions and then some for each of its occupants. Hosting even one extra person meant having to acquire a great deal more food, firewood, and the like. We do not want Klassenburg to think we will provide for any merchants left behind, so that they can use such tactics to learn more about our new products, I said. We must do something to ensure that Klassenburg merchants do not repeat their mistake, which is why Benno suggested that we limit how many merchants they can send and decrease the number of companies we can do business with. Each merchant from Klassenburg we reject frees up a space for a merchant from Dunkelfelder. We can only accommodate 20 companies like this year, and if we accepted the same number from Klassenburg and the sovereignty as before, that would only leave us with 4 slots. By bringing Klassenburg down to 6 slots, however, we could accept 6 companies from Dunkelfelder in total. Benno had worn a very intense smile as he suggested this. It seemed that he was finding the Corinne incident to be truly irritating. It's up to you, Sylvester. You may elect to have each duchy send only 6 companies, or you can reduce this even further to 5, so that Drawanko can be included as well. Ehrenfest can accept no more than 20, but you may fill these spaces as you please. All right, Sylvester eventually said. I'll give it some thought. Our upper limit was so low because Ehrenfest's lower city only had so much space. As it stood, no other cities could accommodate our visitors, but we hope to remedy this by fixing them up. Is Groschel still not ready? I asked. We would have far more leeway if other cities could house the merchants as well. They petitioned for Entwickelns, but those things don't happen fast. I see. In that case, what if we sell the production method for Rinsham at a higher price to cover for how little trade we can accommodate? Doing this will impact our duchy's long-term profits for less than if we reveal how to make plant or identification paper. Besides, Drawanko already seems to be researching our Rinsham at length. We wanted to spread as many trends as we could, and it was ideal for us to prepare our cities, develop trade, and increase foot traffic as quickly as possible. The issue was that Ehrenfest wasn't yet used to receiving visitors from other duchies, and this was causing a mountain of problems. To be frank, it was all but impossible for us to fully develop our trade right now. There's no way that Ehrenfest can produce enough Rinsham to supply all of Jürgenschmidt, and the rising cost of vegetable oil is already a problem within our own borders, I said. I truly believe that we are better off selling the production method for a high price while we still can. Ehrenfest's future is in the printing and publishing industries, not beauty products. I didn't mind surrendering Rinsham to other duchies, but I wanted Ehrenfest to monopolize printing for a while longer. Printing and publishing would always drift towards the most populated areas. Although it had started in Germany back in Earth, it was in Venice that it had properly flourished. But I was determined to keep our duchy at the center of them both for as long as I could. To formulate a price for the production method, I told Sylvester the ballpark figures based on the profits we had made so far. I also added that once other duchies figure out the production method, the market value would plummet to 0. I'll keep that in mind, he said. Anyway, what about the plan to send our Italian restaurant chefs to the Archduke Conference? I consulted the Offmer Company, and they said that they could send those chefs without issue considering the season. They will even be able to sell recipes that their chefs have invented. I traded some of my recipes for theirs, and they were quite delicious. After trading for Lace's newly invented recipes, I had asked Frida if she could somehow obtain Rollrace from Dunkelfelder. I explained that pound cake with Rollrace tasted especially good, and they had decided to import some alongside Wiese at the next opportunity. I'll think about buying new recipes later, Sylvester said. Right now, what matters most is getting enough chefs ready. Regarding the duchies we couldn't afford to make the deal with, our plan was to sell them recipes or the Rinsham production method, depending on how much they were willing to pay. Given how many people could be trying to make contact with Ehrenfest, we would need many chefs. Securing more attendants was easy enough. We could always contact Gibbs and scrape together more from among Ehrenfest's nobles. But the chefs had to be familiar with my recipes and skilled enough to earn a double thumbs up. I was aware that the lack of suitable chefs had proven an issue last year, which was why I had asked Frida to put some extra effort into training more. Now we were fully prepared. Charlotte might be the one flooded with proposals this year, I said, which made Sylvester twist his lips to show he was not amused. If we could continue to produce trends, thereby proving that our achievements weren't just temporary, then it was only natural that other duchies would start wanting to form long-term bonds with us. If she receives enough proposals that we have the leeway to choose between them, please try to respect her will as much as possible. Sylvester gave me a look as though he wanted to say something, but then simply lowered his eyes and nodded, yeah. I wonder what he was wanting to say. Our meetings continued all the way up until the day before everyone was due to leave for the Archduke Conference. The attendants were the first to teleport, Norbert included. As the head attendant, he would be staying at the Royal Academy from the beginning of the conference until the end of this year. Incidentally, Melkor's move to the northern building meant that the section of the main building where the Archduke couple lived would be completely closed off, with everyone focusing on the Archduke Conference instead. The next to move were the scholars and a portion of the knights. I made my way to the teleportations hall to see them off. Hartmut, who was now an adult, was leaving alongside Elvira as a scholar of the printing industry. I am Lady Rosemine's retainer, and I understand her feelings about books better than anyone, Hartmut had said to Elvira when asking to serve as her assistant. Most printing industry scholars were lay nobles to facilitate communications with the commoners, but for the Archduke Conference, it was better to have archnobles to make negotiations with other duchies run more smoothly. Elvira had said that having an archnoble like Hartmut would prove very helpful. Thank you for assisting, Mother, I said. I trust that you will carry out your work as skillfully as always. I shall strive to meet your expectations, Lady Rosamine. With each such detailed documents at hand, we will be more than fine, Elvira said. I, too, am very much invested in the publishing of new books. You may trust us both, Lady Rosamine. This year's negotiations would predominantly involve Ehrenfest purchasing love stories from other duchies to print in Hollandale. Elvira was motivated so yeah, it was surely fine to trust her. Last to leave was the archducal couple. I said my farewells to Karlstedt, who was serving as their guard knights, while Wolfried, Charlotte, and Melkor said their farewells to the archducal couple. We're trusting all of you with the mana replenishment while we're gone, Sylvester said. Yes, Father, I will practice a lot, Melkor replied with a nod and smile. His response earned a chuckle from his two siblings. I cannot imagine you would get too many opportunities, Melkor, Charlotte noted. Back when I first participated in mana replenishment, I could not even move for some time afterward. Just focus on learning to use a little more mana each time, Wolfried added. Upon hearing these warnings, Melkor looked up at his parents with worry in his eyes. They both agreed that he shouldn't push himself, which only made him tense up even more. Everything will be fine if you listen to Bonifacius. Oh, and Ferdinand. Make sure you don't force them to meet your own crazy standards, Sylvester said, warning Ferdinand against falling into his usual Spartan habits. They were his parting words to us as he headed to the teleportation hall with everyone else immediately after. Rosamine, Ferdinand said, as you are going to be balancing 2 courses from this year onward, you would do well to study as much as you can. You will cease to have time to socialize once you return for the dedication ritual. And with that, my fate was sealed. My days in the council this year were to be spent studying for my 3rd-year lessons. Ferdinand, were you not just told that you shouldn't hold up to your crazy standards, I said. These are not my standards, but yours. There is no problem. Ferdinand sure is an expert at spitting sophistry with a straight face, isn't he? The Scholars Course written lessons wouldn't be a problem since I already knew the contents. My concern was about the Archduke candidate courses, which were said to be much tougher. Charlotte's eyes widened when she heard that I was going to be studying for the Archduke candidate courses. Uncle, she said, I would like to learn alongside Sister. Me too, Wolfried added. I can't study for the Archduke candidate course on my own, since I don't have any study materials. Ferdinand stared at them for a moment, seemingly as surprised as I was. Neither of us had expected that Wolfried and Charlotte would want to study as well. It was only after tapping his temples in thought for a moment that he offered a response. The goal of these studies is for Rosamine to finish her classes in time for the dedication ritual, and I have no intention of teaching either of you content that she already knows. If you end up falling behind, then you will simply have to watch. You may attend the lessons if you agree to these terms. Wolfried and Charlotte were overjoyed to have received this approval, and their bright expressions weren't lost on Melkor, who earnestly said, I want to join too, Uncle. I would have approved my little brother's participation in a heartbeat, but Ferdinand didn't like his plans being interfered with. Wolfried and Charlotte were manageable since he had spent several years with them already and knew how well they would listen to his instructions, but Melkor was more or less a fresh face. Ferdinand gazed down at him, then his brows drawn together in a frown. I promise to be quiet and not get in anyone's way, Melkor added. You will be removed the very instant you break that promise, Ferdinand replied. He spoke without the slightest trace of warmth. But he had still given his permission. Melkor cheered with everyone, openly elated. Seeing his innocent celebration brought a smile to my face. But Ferdinand just heaved a frustrated sigh. The fact that he had conceded to the idea, despite how annoying he evidently found it, showed just how much his stony heart had softened. The old Ferdinand would have rejected Melchior on the spot and said that allowing him to participate was a waste of time for sure. Retainers weren't allowed to be present for our Archduke candidate course studies classes to the castle, in the same way that they weren't allowed to attend our classes in the Royal Academy. We each had one of our guard knights stand at the door, while Ferdinand dispersed the rest until fourth bell, asserting that they would be in the way otherwise. This reminds me, who are the professors for the Archduke candidate course when Archduke candidates can't move to the sovereignty, I asked. It was even more of a burning question now that we were in a classroom of only Archduke candidates. I think Professor Gundolf is one. Do the lessons even have professors? Ferdinand, who had been preparing the usual face stones, narrowed his eyes in thought as he thought back on his own experiences. In my day, it was a royal, that or of a former Archduke candidate married into royalty. At the time, there were many who could fulfill the role of a professor, but now I am not so sure. As we were aware, the Civil War had resulted in a drastic reduction in the number of royals. It seemed that not even Ferdinand knew who would be teaching us. You will see for yourself when you go to the Royal Academy, Ferdinand concluded. For now, let us begin by separating the elements of mana. You will not be able to move on to Archduke candidate practical lessons until you are able to do this. Apparently, separating mana like this was something that all third years were taught to do. One would divide it according to its elements and then reform it. As you know, it is easiest to control mana from which you have an aptitude, Ferdinand said. He went on to explain that most lay nobles didn't have many elements in their mana, which made splitting and fusing it quite the challenge. That said, those with only a single element could quite easily separate from given bits of mana. Archnoble and Archduke candidates, in contrast, have many elements, Ferdinand continued. They often find it easy to combine mana of their elements once taught how to, but they have great difficulty removing elements from their own mana, which is normally mixed within them at all times. Face stones of each element were prepared for us, and we touched them one by one to understand the feeling of pulling mana of a singular element. We were then tasked with making a face stone while trying to keep the mana of separate elements from mixing. If you learn to control your mana freely, then you will be able to fill an empty face stone with mana of a pure singular element, Ferdinand said. The exceptionally dexterous will even be able to replace the element of a face stone entirely. Separating elements from face stones acquired from fake creatures will also become a trivial matter. I touched the face stone that I was provided with and got to work separating the elements of my mana, but when I showed my attempt to Ferdinand, they are mixed, do it again. The three of us received the same disheartening response over and over again. Charlotte was the first to tap out, as she was the least used to controlling her mana. She had only recently learned to use mana compression, which means she had the smallest capacity of us all. Wilfred was trying his best, but he also dropped out once he started feeling sick. Drink a rejuvenation potion and recover your mana, Ferdinand instructed. There is mana replenishment to be carried out after dinner. Wilfred mumbled something in response while reaching for a rejuvenation potion on his belt. You presumably have mana to spare, Rosemine, Ferdinand said. Focus. I focused on my face stone while Ferdinand glared at me. The task he had given us was surprisingly hard, since controlling one's elements felt nothing like controlling one's mana in general. Maybe I can base this on an established method for separating a mixed substance, I thought, racking my brain for ideas. The clearer a visual one had, the easier it was to control one's mana. Separation, a centrifuge, maybe? Oh! Back in high school, we learned about paper chromatography during biology. Can I use that knowledge here? In the end, I decided to swing my hand around and picture the elements going into different fingers. Rosemine, what is that hand motion? Ferdinand asked. Just let her do it and try it. My way of visualizing the separation process. I'm separating my mana while doing this. It is unsightly. Ferdinand thought very little of my idea, but I didn't care. It ended up working like a charm. Wow! Nice! Good job, Rosemine. Sorry, I had to drink some of my drink. Mana replenishment was performed after dinner, though it seemed to have been quite a struggle. Charlotte was just going to be sitting and watching any of our practical lessons that required mana from tomorrow onward, though she will participate fully in any that didn't. Once you have learned to separate and combine mana, what comes next is neutralizing face stones of mana and turning them into gold dust, Ferdinand said. Of course, as you have mistakenly done this countless times already, Rosemine, there is no need for me to teach you. We shall instead move on to practicing there we go. This is where we get to find out the God of Darkness and God of Light's names, or God of Darkness and Goddess of Light's names, because before now, they had only been named as their titles. The others have names. Flutrain, the Goddess of Water, Abiglade, the God of Life. You get what I'm saying? The others don't have names yet, because apparently, yeah, if you try to say their name, if someone were to tell you their name, I think they would die or something, from what I've heard. Let's see. Ferdinand was holding a small box containing the kind of face stones used for foundational magic. In class, students were tasked with using them to create a miniature city, but in order to accomplish that, one first needed to draw a blueprint of sorts. In practice, the most common approach is to use existing buildings and make only small changes to them. Ferdinand said one cannot risk failing when it comes to a large-scale effort such as creation magic, not to mention trying to prepare blueprints from scratch is an exhausting endeavor. One could always have scholars help with the blueprints, but it was absolutely crucial that an archduke be knowledgeable enough to identify any potential errors. Thus, we were all made to practice drawing them together. Our first task was to make our ideal room. "I'm good at blueprints," Wolfried crowed as he eagerly got to work. He was presumably designing something from scratch, whereas Charlotte intended to recreate her existing room in excruciating detail. Melkor was holding his pen with a smile, but given how shaky his lines were, his attempt probably wouldn't function as a room. My ideal room, The first thing that came to mind was a room with bookcases on every wall and an abundance of reading material on every shelf. My own personal library from my Arano days. It reminded me of my inglorious death back then, and I couldn't help but groan. It was weird just thinking about it. "Rosamund, is this truly that difficult for you?" Ferdinand asked. "The first room I envisioned was overflowing with books," I replied, "but then I imagined them all tumbling down and crushing me to death, which made me question whether it was truly as ideal. In any case, complete the blueprint in time for our lesson tomorrow." Ferdinand dismissed my agonizing with a cold remark and set the question as my homework. This brought us all the way up to 4th bell, which marked the end of our class for the day. We all made our way to the dining hall for lunch. Bonifacius was surely struggling as he dealt with the office all on his own, but he was helping out anyway. As we ate, he said that not offering his assistance would have been shameful, especially when I was coming first in class while doing temple work on top of everything else. "I will strive to meet your expectations, grandfather." Even while eating lunch, my head was filled with thoughts of a book-filled room. My top priority had to be ensuring that the books wouldn't fall from their shelves during an earthquake. Everything else would come later. As I continued to mull things over, the door to the dining hall opened. It seemed we had a visitor. "Lord Ferdinand, there has been an urgent summons from the Archduke Conference," the messenger said. "Please head to the Royal Academy at once." Oh no. I have an idea of what this is. If I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong. Our preparations for the Archduke Conference had been severely lacking last year, but even then, none of us had received a summons. Ferdinand appeared gravely serious as he quickly finished his meal while Justice instructed the attendant and the knights with him. "Rosamund, or Bonifacius, if you excuse me, I must depart. I leave the rest to you. Go on, I'll take care of him." Ferdinand exited the dining hall at a brisk walk. It was unusual for him to see him in such a rush, and I could hear the drone of urgent conversation outside the room after he went. My heart pounded in my chest. His harsh expression had somehow resembled the one he had made when facing down the Sovereign Knight Commander in the Royal Academy's library, which made me feel even more uneasy than I could put into words. I'm still scared. Apparently, Ferdinand returned the same night he was summoned. Our lessons continued the next day as though nothing had happened, and seeing his usual stony face in all its expressionless glory made me sigh in relief. It was a quiet sigh, of course. I didn't want to risk him hearing me. "So, why did you get summoned yesterday?" I asked. "It does not matter. It is over," Ferdinand replied, but he was clearly more displeased than usual. I'm really hoping it's not what I'm thinking of. Our lesson continued, but I know what's going to happen, guys. I know what will happen. It's essentially how next volume goes, essentially. And I don't want to think about it. Our lesson continued, but the atmosphere was exceedingly tense. Melkor seemed to be a little frightened by the intensity that Ferdinand exuded, while Wolfried was wearing a stiff expression, trying to gauge how our teacher was feeling. Eventually, it came time for us to have lunch. Bonifacius must have had exactly the same thought as me when he saw what an absolute state Ferdinand was in, as he asked Ferdinand, "What incidentally brought you to the Archduke conference yesterday?" "It is over." "It does not seem over to me," Bonifacius replied with a glare. "Something is weighing on you, I assume. Spit it out." Ferdinand, I knew it! I knew it! I knew what it freaking was, and I was really hoping that it wouldn't happen, but I know it. Ferdinand sighed. Arensbach has petitioned the king for a male Archduke candidate of adult or near adult age to be married into their duchy. "Wait, what?" I asked. "Would they be marrying Lady Detlinde?" "Who else?" Ferdinand asked, fixing me with a stern look that made me shut my mouth at once. He had a good point. Arensbach only had 2 Archduke candidates. One was Detlinde, and the other was a little girl called Letzia, who was too young to be even attending the Royal Academy. They requested it, but we declined for several reasons, Ferdinand continued. My absence would leave Ehrenfest with even fewer adult archducal family members. I am your guardian. My relationship with Veronica, no woman from Arensbach will make for an equal trade, as there are none who could take my place and work as a representative archduke. It seemed that Sylvester had valiantly fought against Arensbach's archducal couple and refused their position. In response, they had expressed their suspicion that Ferdinand was still suffering from Veronica's grudge against him, since he was continuing to serve in the temple. That's by choice. That one's by choice, because he returned to noble society. He didn't have to be the high priest if he didn't want to. And I'm sure Sylvester would have accommodated for that, but no, he decided to return back, so that is by choice. That's not because of Veronica. Georgine ultimately asked for me to share my stance in person, as she thought it obvious that I would rather be married to the next Ob of a greater duchy than continue serving as the high priest against my supposed will in Ehrenfest. So that was why Ferdinand was summoned. Yeah, to say, yeah, I'm not going anywhere. But you aren't serving as the high priest against your will, are you? Hence why I'm saying the matter is over. This response calmed me down, but several days later, Ferdinand was summoned again, this time by the king. Oh. I don't think it's gonna go well, guys. I don't think that's gonna be over. That's not over. I saw him off, sympathizing with his struggle of getting dragged to and fro. He shook his head with exasperation and stepped onto the teleporter to the Royal Academy. He's been gone a lot longer than last time, I mused aloud. Has he gotten caught up in something already? 2 days had passed since Ferdinand had been summoned, but he still hadn't returned. We couldn't continue our preparatory lessons for the Archduke candidate course without him, so I was being made to practice sewing for my bridal training and focus on my harpsichord practice. To be honest, studying for my practical lessons sounded way more preferable. Riarda, could grandfather not teach me? I asked. Lord Bonifacius has his own work to do as the acting Archduke, she replied. He does not have time to spend on your extracurricular lessons. The duchy's key scholars were going to the Archduke conference, and there weren't many scholars staying behind in general, so he was apparently in quite a rough situation. I shall assist him then. You cannot fool me, milady. You are making the same face as Lord Sylvester makes when attempting to escape his duties. She saw it. I don't blame her. I wouldn't want to do sewing either. I had no hope of deceiving Riarda when she had spent decades honing her eyes and keeping Sylvester a regular offender from running away yet again. In other words, I would need to rely on a more direct attack. Riarda, I would rather read than sew, even if the book is not an enjoyable one. I just want to prepare for my next year at the Royal Academy. Please do allow me to read. Lady Rosamund has to leave partway through the term for the dedication ritual, so she needs to study in every opportunity, Felina Roderick added, trying to back me up. Also, bear in mind that she's taking both the Scholar course and the Archduke course next year. Riarda shot the idea down with a stern expression. She has finished studying for the Scholar course at the Royal Academy, if you recall, and studying for the Archduke candidate course is on hold until my boy Ferdinand returns. Tell me, what will she even be preparing for? I slumped my shoulders. Riarda had an unrivaled understanding of all my activities in the Royal Academy, meaning I had no choice but to continue my embroidery. Bonifacius joined us for dinner as per usual. He looked exhausted, maybe because he was having to shoulder all the work done alone without Ferdinand here to help. Grandfather, are you doing okay on your own? I asked. I can always help out if you like. No, there's no need to worry. I am fine, Bonifacius replied, dismissing the idea with a wave. He then looked up with a start. Wait, I see. You can help me, Rosamund. Yes, I assist Ferdinand with his work in the temple and Sylvester in the winter, so I do believe I can be of at least some help to you. Rosamund, you've been helping Father in the winter, Wilfred asked, staring at me in surprise. I explained the situation to him, that I had been summoned back to Ehrenfest quite some time before the dedication ritual, and had assisted Sylvester in the interim. At which point he turned to Bonifacius with determined eyes. Lord Bonifacius, I would like to help as well. At this rate, Rosamund will take all the Archduke work for herself. Worry not, I shall do nothing of the sort, I replied. In fact, I would prefer that you take my share of Archduke duties as well. My ultimate aim is to read, not work. Do take care to remember that. In any case, I didn't expect them to have the leeway to educate Wilfrid when they were already suffering from a lack of manpower. I watched as Bonifacius fell into thought for a moment and then nodded. Very well then, Bonifacius said. If you're to be the next Archduke, then you'll need to learn the work sooner rather than later. Sylvester struggled a great deal due to his father passing away while he was still so young. He had very deftly omitted the fact that Sylvester's struggle was mostly related to his tendency to shy away from his work. Wilfrid was motivated, so it was decided that he and his scholars would all help out as well. Bonifacius was confident that having adult scholars on board would ensure that the process went smoothly. I admire your willingness to train a successor while you're so busy yourself, grandfather, I said. I cannot help but view you in contrast to Ferdinand, who immediately cuts off anyone who deems to be useless. Ferdinand was still quite new to the idea of training successors. He had started off with Camphor and Freetic in the temple, but even then he needed to do all the work on his own, since it was much faster. There was no way he would take the time to teach a kid who was caught up in such an extremely busy period. I see, so you admire me, huh? Bonifacius muttered, nodding to himself again and again with a broad grin. Melchior raised a clenched fist into the air and said, I want to help too. I understand that you wish to join us, Charlotte interjected, but you are still too young to help Lord Bonifacius. Upon hearing this, Melchior slumped over in disappointment. I know that I only slow things down, but I want to be with you all. I'm sure there are some things that Melchior can help with, I said. Charlotte let out a sigh. Sister, it will take you and Lord Bonifacius quite some time just to find work for him to do. Melchior, please sit this one out, and in return you may study in the corner of the office. I will sit nearby to ensure that you do not interfere. Will that suffice? I was moved. Charlotte had put forward precisely the kind of solution that a big sister would come up with to help her little brother after living with him for such a long time. I was a fake in comparison. I tried to grant Melchior's wishes in any way that I could, but Charlotte actually acknowledged and respected the feelings behind them, even when she refused him. When I came to our big sister power level, she was miles above me. I accept this, Bonifacius said. Study well, son. Sir, Melchior replied happily. Charlotte watched on with a warm smile that reminded me of the one that so often graced Florencia's lips. It left no room for doubt that they were mother and daughter. We started helping Bonifacius in the afternoon the very next day. We had spent the morning focused on our studies, and after finishing my Harspiel and dedication world practice, I headed straight for the Archduke's office. Our presence would probably make things harder to begin with, so I needed to delegate the workloads as much as I could in the morning. This work here can be done by Wilfrid, this by Charlotte, this by Melchior, and this by me and my retainers, I said. But as for this work, I am afraid you will need to do it yourself, grandfather. Of course, Charlotte and Melchior are only here to study today, but as their scholars are present as well, do not hesitate to distribute work to them. Bonifacius' eyes widened at the now organized amount of paperwork. You know what kind of work their retainers are capable of doing, he asked. Not exactly, I replied. I only know the ability of the apprentice scholars I've seen working in the Royal Academy. I intend to use today to gauge how the others do, and if they perform well, we may trust them with more work from tomorrow onward. I didn't really know how much work Wilfrid's scholars could be trusted with, so the pile for my retainer was taller than any other. Considering how fast my retinue worked on the temple, however, I was fairly confident that they could have this work finished by the end of the day. Once the work was distributed among Archduke candidates, I started distributing mine among my retainers. These are for Roderick, these are for Feline, these are also for Feline, these are for Roderick, these are for Daniel. Wait, Rosamund, Bonifacius said, was that not a knight's name? Yes, but I don't see that as an issue. Of all of my knights, save for Angelica, do the work of scholars in the temple. Or is that a problem in the castle? Daniel wasn't the only knight capable of doing scholar work. Cornelius, Lenore, and Judith all helped out in the high priest's office when I was there. Bonifacius frowned. There's no precedent for using knights as scholars, but it shouldn't be an issue during the Archduke conference. Given the shortage of manpower, I can't imagine anyone protesting. We should use what we can. He had a surprisingly flexible attitude, and my affection points for him were shooting up. I'm glad that we get to work together, grandfather. We all spent the afternoon doing our work, but the Archduke's office wasn't big enough to hold Bonifacius, Wilfrid, Charlotte, Melchior, and me, and all of our retainers at once. For this reason, we moved to a meeting room and worked there instead. Charlotte was busy watching Melchior practice math. Bonifacius turned to Melchior's retainers and said, if you all do your work properly, Melchior will not feel so useless. Your tasks today are for the sake of your lord. Do them well. It wasn't long before Charlotte's and Melchior's retainers were delving into their paperwork for the day. Bonifacius was instructing Wilfrid's scholars as they continued their work. Now then, I suppose we should begin as well, I said. Do we really have to do scholar work here too? Cornelius asked with a grimace. The other guard knights were either standing behind their Archduke candidate or guarding the door like Angelica. There is only a manpower shortage during the Archduke conference, I replied. Lord Bonifacius said that he will allow this. My retainers had so much more work to do than anyone else, but we got through it so much faster than because my guard knights were helping, and we were also used to the process from our experience in the temple. The other scholars were having to learn new things to get the work done. I have finished this, Lady Rosemine, Lenore said. May I ask you to look it over? Is the map here correct? Judith asked. This part. The flow of money doesn't seem quite right. We should investigate it carefully, Daniel said, having discovered what seemed to be embezzlement. We ultimately decided to wait until Sylvester and the others got back before looking into it any further. At Fifth Bell, we took an extended break and enjoyed the tea and sweets that our attendants brought in for us. You're all so amazing. I want to be useful soon, too, Melkor said, looking at me with respect in his eyes while eating a sweet. Receiving such praise from my little brother really did warm my heart. I needed to keep up the hard work now and forever. Ferdinand is certainly putting your knights through their paces at the temple, huh? Bonifacius says. To be honest, I never thought knights could manage to do scholar work so effectively. Back at the Royal Academy, I kept hearing that her scholars are on another level than mine, but I never thought her knights would be this impressive too, Wilfrid said. Charlotte was nodding along with him. Lord Wilfrid, it is not the duty of a knight to do paperwork. Please do not take after Lady Rosemine and start making unreasonable demands of us. Lambert said, eliciting a firm nod of agreement from Cornelius. There is much you can learn from observing how Lady Rosemine trains her scholars, but you should allow your knights to stick to their own duties. Indeed, Bonifacius added. Wilfrid, you must not have your scholars do more work. Wilfrid shook his head in protest and said, but I am. They are doing more printing work by the day. It was true that printing was going to be Ehrenfest's primary industry going forward, but Wilfrid wasn't actually that involved with it. Out of all of our retainers, the only one deemed fit enough to accompany Sylvester to the Archduke conference was Hartmut. If you are motivated, then I can ask Elvira to send more and more work your way, I said. Most of the scholars involved in the printing industry are lay nobles, and she has been talking about wanting to have more arch nobles and men nobles to bring to future conferences. Perhaps you could train them in preparation for next year. Our plan was to announce printed goods during next year's Archduke conference, and chaos was bound to ensue. The more people we had there, the better. If we can send as many of our adult retainers as possible, I am sure it will make all the difference for us in the future, I continued. It will also be heartening for our retainers to have a grasp on how the Archduke conference functions before we must go there ourselves. I am very much looking forward to Hartmut's report. Wilfrid looked over his own retainers, a competitive fire burning in his eyes. All right, he said. I'll make sure mine are good enough to attend the Archduke conference next year. Okay, perfect. New recruits for the printing industry. We got used to the new work over the next few days, and soon reached the point where we could talk casually during breaks. According to Cornelius, the grades of the apprentice knights were steadily rising, thanks to the Rosemine mana compression method. Matthias is very impressive, then, for keeping up with them while working so desperately to compress his mana on his own. Lenore nodded. He can give orders in my place and possesses more mana than average for a men noble. We would ask you to take him as a retainer, but he is unfortunately of the former Veronica faction, she said with a troubled smile. We have been struggling to find a suitable guard knight to replace Traugott. Gerlach's son, huh? Bonifacius asked with a grimace. Rosemine, no matter how skilled this boy is, and no matter how much you might wish for his service, you must not take him as a retainer unless he gives you his name. He is too dangerous otherwise. The way that Bonifacius spoke made it sound as though he knew something that I didn't. I gazed at him quizzically, urging him to elaborate, but he just shook his head and repeated that the former Veronica faction was dangerous before changing the topic. More importantly, your mana compression method is something else, Rosemine. Well done for thinking that one up, Bonifacius said, describing how much progress the knights were making amid some generous words of praise. That lay knight guard of yours, he glanced over at Daniel, probably wouldn't have lasted this long if not for that technique. He was lucky that his growth period ended so late, and that when coupled with your mana compression method, it meant that he could increase his capacity far more than anyone would expect from a lay noble. I seem to recall my Omega Blessing being the primary reason for Daniel making so much progress, not his late growth period, but that was a secret between Karstead and me. Is Daniel still growing, I asked? No, his capacity has been relatively stagnant over the past year or two. No matter how late it started, his growing period must have stopped by now. Of course, that just means his vessel has stopped developing. He can keep compressing his mana to fit more into the space he's working with, and he can get better at fighting by using his noggin. It seemed that Daniel now had the average mana capacity of a low or mid-tier men noble. Considering how small it had originally been, that was a massive upgrade. I wouldn't expect any more dramatic improvements from him, Bonifacius continued. That boy's reached his peak. Knowing this, will you still use him as a guard knight? I noticed Daniel tightly clench his fist out of the corner of my eye and nodded at once. His mana is not his main strength. It's not for Daniel. My retainers would not be anywhere near as organized as they are now. I have no intention of relieving him of duty, whether that be now or in the future. I see. Then I will continue whipping him into shape. Daniel met this news with a hard expression, but he would suffer even more without Bonifacio's training. The road ahead was going to be tough for him, so I wanted him to keep working hard. He knew too many of my secrets. If circumstances ever led to him letting let go, there was a very real chance that everyone around me would try to silence him for good. I didn't want to have to stress over that. Please whip the other apprentice guard knights into shape as well. They are now coordinating more, but they still fail to understand the contribution scoring system, I said, explaining Judith's reaction to the fish slaughtering. I see, Bonifacius replied. He looked over the gathered apprentice knights with a wide grin. Seems like I need to rethink their training. Grandfather, what was the Royal Academy like when you were there? I asked another day. The Civil War had resulted in many tremendous changes, and things were now very different from when Ferdinand had attended. I was wondering whether going all the way back to Bonifacius' years will reveal even more dissimilarities. I mentioned the old diary that Solange had allowed me to borrow, and the various ways that things had changed compared to when it was written. Then I asked Bonifacius what he remembered about his days in the Royal Academy. The Academy, huh? He said. The most I remember is people running around for treasure-stealing dinner. According to Bonifacius, the scholars would desperately start making rejuvenation potions from the very moment they learned how to, and when they weren't making such potions, they were creating magic tools necessary for dinner. Attendants would focus on the information war, with some even flying around on high beasts to refill magic tools and the night's rejuvenation potions. My initial assumption had been that Bonifacius was the type of person to charge ahead of everyone else to strike first in battle. But as an Archduke candidate, he had instead focused on taking command and moving troops. Of course, I made sure to show off the power of my fists whenever the opportunity arose, Bonifacius made sure to note. He went on to explain that he had been friends with archnobles from Dunkelfelger and the now-gone Workstock, and that he had sometimes taken the apprentice knights out hunting. Oh, that reminds me. I once destroyed a shrine on the Academy grounds in the heat of a dinner game. That's terrible, I explained. Wait, so is one of the Academy's 20 mysteries actually about you? Then what about the delinquent student who played pranks at the Shrine of the Gods, dotting the Royal Academy's grounds? No, a story like that can't be about me, Bonifacius said, rushing to defend himself. I only broke one, and I reported it immediately. It should be repaired by now. On a more important note, what's this about 20 mysteries? It's news to me. I didn't expect him to know about it, but I told him one of the 20 mysteries I had heard from Solange. Melchior and Charlotte, among others, listened to great interest. What did you mean it should be repaired by now? I asked. Did you not check, Grandfather? It's not my fault. There are rarely any opportunities to return to the Royal Academy after you graduate. Riarda chuckled as she refreshed my tea. You mustn't be deceptive, Lord Bonifacius. You do not visit the Royal Academy every year for the Archduke Conference when serving the previous Archduke as the Knight Commander. Riarda, Bonifacius exclaimed with an awkward grimace. She was about his age, meaning she was old enough to know his past. And his secrets. I shall check on that shrine in my place then, I said. Do you remember where it was? I would expect it to be covered in snow during the winter. It should only be visible during the Archduke Conference when the grounds are clear. In short, I was unlikely to be able to find it while I was actually at the Royal Academy. How unfortunate. Incidentally, I took this opportunity to ask him whether he knew anything about the Forbidden Archive. I can't say I recognize that name, he replied. I always sent scholars to get what I needed from the library and never went there myself. To me, Bonifacius had always come across as somewhat of a maverick who would break boundaries whenever he went. But it turned out that he had been a surprisingly ordinary Archduke candidate. Lord Bonifacius, Riarda interjected, would it not be more accurate to say that you rarely use the library at all? Riarda? Bonifacius fell into a sudden silence. His pouty expression was admittedly quite cute, and everyone who had been listening couldn't help but laugh. It turned out that he was hard to talk about your past when someone who shared that knowledge was standing nearby. Okay. I think I'm going to end this off here. I'll see everybody in the next one.